We're here today to talk about land, body, water, poetry. I like how land and body go together. They're kind of firm and grounded, and water and poetry is much more fluid. And the combination of the two is something that I look forward to exploring. My name is Jónína Kirton. I'm Icelandic Métis from Treaty 1, and I'm currently in the land of the Kwakwat Nation, Tsleil-Waututh, and Stolo. I'm very happy to be here with you, and I would like to just tell you a little bit about myself before we start. I come from Treaty 1, as I said. I was born in Portage-la-Prairie, and I am Métis on my father's side and Icelandic on my mother's side. We're probably going to discuss a little bit today some things about intersections. So where I locate myself in the world of intersections is I am Métis, which of course puts me in the person of color category, be it that I'm a little fairer than many, I'm still in that category. And I am a late blooming writer. So here I am, a poet starting to write at 50. And now I'm 65 and I've been writing for 15 years and just starting to feel like I'm really getting my legs under me. I find it takes quite a while to really become a good writer, and dedication to the craft is really important for me. I enjoy it. What else can I tell you about myself? I was a single mother for 14 years, so I got to experience the joys of going to the income assistance office, getting daycare subsidies, and all the things that come with being a single parent on a low income. And then later in life, I've had health challenges. So these things have really shaped my writing and shaped the things that I think about and talk about when I'm writing. And I'm going to get to talk to you today with one of my most beloved mentors, Joanne Arnott. Joanne is also, we come from a similar place. I'll let her talk more about that. We are close in age. I am older, and I have been a huge fan of hers from day one. When I first began writing, Joanne was there, and I just kind of glommed onto her. And she felt like home, let me just say that, which relates to land very much. So, Joanne?
Thank you, Jónína. Where I am, I'm in Richmond. So in terms of the colonial names, Jónína is in Westminster. I'm just down the river, closer to the mouth of the river in Richmond. And that Richmond is a municipality composed of the islands in the mouth of the Fraser River. So this is Musqueam territory. Musqueam people had named houses, all over the place on most of these islands. And in terms of the water-based economy, islands were also a great gathering place for indigenous people from all up and down the coast. And, moving into colonial times, a lot of a great gathering again around work in the fisheries and the canneries and so on. So, like Jónína, I was born in Treaty 1 territories, although I didn't know that at the time. And not until I was in my 50s did I know that, or 40s maybe. So I was born in Winnipeg, which is, if I remember correctly, 52 miles from Portage-la-Prairie. My father was from Portage-la-Prairie, and I ended up living in rural Portage between the ages of 11 and 15, and with my dad and my siblings. So I had an opportunity to get to know kind of that side of the family more. My dad's parents both died when he was 20, 21, and I came along much later. I'm the fifth of 9 children that my dad had. So one of our shared interests is finding out more about Treaty 1 territory and the geography and so on. I do identify as Métis mixed blood. Most of my Manitoba relatives are Manitoba Métis Federation, what do you call it? Signatories.
We have Métis status in Manitoba.
Métis status, that's right. I have,
in Manitoba.
Because of the finances involved, because I am a mother of 6, I don't have that whole genealogy legally clarified. We're working on it. But my uncle John and his wife Helen both have recently passed, and they were elders at the Friendship Society in Portage. I can't remember, Jónína. I got your address. I was going to send you a book. Did I send you the book or not? Not yet.
Not yet, no.
Oh, okay. So what the book is a beautiful oral history of Portage that I wanted to share with you. You know, I acquire things and then they get dispersed across my messy house. So
I can relate.
something to look forward to. It's got a picture of my uncle and auntie, and it's got stories from so many different people, and you know, representing many, many families of that Portage region. So that's something to look forward to.
I do look forward to it.
Okay, so in terms of my writing, I started writing and publishing, I guess, relatively young, and my family was very poor, you know, on the good day, working class, but very, very arts positive. My dad was a guitar player, musician. My mom, he taught my mom to play guitar and all the kids. And my mom was a painter. She used to, when I was very young, you know, she had her oil paints. She had a little space. So that's kind of amazing to have 8 kids and somehow find a little time to do a little oil painting. I don't know. So they were both my role models in terms of arts, right? As well as all of my older siblings and younger as well. Not everyone has an art practice, but most do. For most of us, there's something, whether it's music, painting, writing, just our normal, right? Part of how you process the world. So I've had, I guess, 6 poetry books published, 3 chapbooks, a book of essays. I'm working on a 2nd book of essays, and I had a children's illustrated. The children's illustrated was illustrated by Marianne Barkhouse. It was about childbirth, called Ma McDonald, long out of print. I've had maybe 2 pieces of short fiction published, and I had a play brought to the level, like, we had a stage reading, so that was as far as we went with that. I wanted to position myself further in terms of, so I identify as making mixed blood. There are many, many people in my family who are LGBTQ2, like, I don't know what the statistical norm is, but we are way beyond that. And that includes, you know, lesbian women, gay men, and trans people. I just want to acknowledge, you know, all the teaching and care that has been shared. Yeah, I spent like a decade or so, more than a decade, teaching or facilitating unknown races workshops, and that has brought me into certain patterns of thinking that are very centered in each of our experiences rather than a more academic way of approaching things. So that was actually one of our big conversations, Jónína and I, in terms of being invited to talk to the issue of decolonizing or decolonial feminism. It's like, okay, what the hell is it? So at the time of asking, my only association with decolonial was Leanne Simpson's title, Islands of Decolonial Love. So we did a little research, you know, checked out, okay, what's post-colonial, what's decolonial, you know, how are they the same, what's different? And, you know, at the end of the day, we decided that speaking, you know, as ourselves and for ourselves is the way to progress. Neither Jónína and I, or I, have a strong academic background, so you could say we're community-based poets. So we shall proceed from here. I guess one thing to note in terms of Indigenous writers across the board, neither Jónína nor I grew up on reserve. We're both from, you know, mixed blood families of one sort or another. And we are both, you know, longtime West Coast residents. So those are some of the qualities, I guess, that'll be reflected in how we talk, what position we're speaking from. I'm a cis woman, heterosexual, breeder. And I'm not a grandma yet. I'm grandma age, but my children have not put me into the role of grandmother yet.
Yes. Yeah, and I like that you bring up the community-based part of things. For me, I've just been more on the grassroots level. I worked with PeerNet BC for a while, and we taught some stuff too around the anti-oppression and taught peer support facilitators. And I am a big fan of peer support and of, you know, the fact that the people who are living that experience, the lived experience, are often sometimes the best equipped to work with those communities. But unfortunately, we're not supported enough sometimes. So it comes down to money. I've been quite poor because I chose to do that kind of work. But I wouldn't change it.
Now, one thing that we've talked about quite a bit, that you also identify as a person with disabilities.
Yeah.
I don't remember you saying that, so I just thought I'd invite you, if you want to say anything about the kind of the physical side of things, go for it.
Especially since we're talking about the body, this is actually really fits. And I just had a really fantastic discussion on Twitter, me and many other people, with Amanda Leduc, about why do so many authors who have disabilities not put that in their bio. And I am one of those people. Other than on Twitter, I listed myself as a spoonie, which not everybody understands what that is. A spoonie is every day, every person has, say, 12 spoons, and that's their energy. So most people start with their 12 spoons. Maybe they had a bad night, they start with 10. I start with 3. And so then my days are short as to what I can physically manage. So I have fibromyalgia. That's what they say. I'm not exactly convinced that's the diagnosis, but the doctors tend to ignore women, and particularly Indigenous women, when they go to see them about things that are going on for them. So yes, it's hard for me to claim that, and there's a couple of reasons. One is because I feel that I don't want to claim space, that I think of it as someone who has more disability than me. And so this is this thing that happens often with the intersections, is the comparison. Who has more trauma, who has more this, who has more that. And I get uncomfortable when we get into those areas. So sometimes I just remain quiet. So thank you for inviting me to speak to that. I do believe our lands and bodies are very connected. I had a body that loved the land, still loves the land. It just can't feel the way it did when I was young. Yeah.
All right, well, shall we read a poem?
Yes.
Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
I'd love it if you'd start.
Okay.
I know what you're going to share, so I want to hear it.
Okay, let me get this. All right, ooh, there we go. That is my chapbook. It's called Pensive and Beyond, and it is published by Nomados Press, or Nomados, just at the end of last year, so it's still new. And my focus in the writing, or the compilation of it, was friendship and death. It's a celebration of friendship, and it's also, many of the poems are focused on people who have passed. More than half of the poems are focused on people who I consider friends or fellow travelers who are with us. So I don't want to bring this idea that if they're in the book, they're not. The poem that I'm going to share is called Truth and Wreck for Chief Robert Joseph. And this was a commissioned poem. Chief Robert Joseph, a wonderful man. I won't go into more detail, but if you Google Chief Robert Joseph and Joanne Arnott, you will find more discussion about the particular project. Anyway, I begin and end the poem with quotes from elders. Rita Joe, I lost my talk. Chief Robert Joseph, am I a human being? So Rita Joe had passed at the time of the writing of the poem, and Chief Robert Joseph was with us. Likewise, at the end, when I was commissioned for the poem, the person that one of the people, the main person that I called and said, "What the hell do I say?" was Jane Quatley Marston. She's a writer and a carver on the island, and we had quite a long discussion. But the thing that really stood out, that she repeated a number of times, was listen to the trees talk. And then the person who is more local to me, but also more past, Chief Dan George, like the thunderbird of old, I shall rise again out of the sea. So this is a poem called Truth and Wreck. Rita Joe, I lost my talk. Chief Robert Joseph, am I a human being? I have a multiplicity of stories within me. Some are the bones of me, some are the blood, some are the meat of me, some are the stagnant pools of chi, some are the resuscitation of being rising up. I feel a cool wind blowing through when I hear the truth. The truth about who is dying from neglect, who is lied about, who is suppressed, who is showcased and honored and no, wait, listen, who is allowed a natural life, who is interfered with, who is taken. Rising up. A cool wave of truth flowing through, aligning the bones and the meat of my stories. Cousins disappearing from the left hand, new cousins arriving on the right hand. Who is interfered with? Who is paid to raise whose children? How indigenous families became outlawed, how settler economies feed upon us. The cool truth has a hot heart. The cool truth has a sober word for you. The cool truth is a mind-blowing instrument, blowing through the dead leaves of the fallen, blowing away the grit of snow under which the stories are buried, frozen, taking up a shovel for redemption. Our land is in a state of productive confusion, the chaos, the liberation of stories, shining the light of the unspoken to re-inflect all that was said to the children, all that was said, and the great unsaid. Histories commingling, a mammoth nerve complex evolving, new and old stories together, your stories with my stories, no longer compelled to choose between or to go mad, crying. The dams are weakening, let them fall. The wreck of the self-deceptive nation, struggling toward transformation, we are coming into being, writing a new song of wholesome on the stinking bones of our undefended regret. Heat of transformative anger shed, the colonial project unmasked, interrupted. Grace notes glimmering, with passion, with innocence. Jane Quatlimat Marston, listen to the trees talk. Chief Dan George, like the thunderbird of old, I shall rise again out of the sea.
Powerful. Wow. Said, unsaid, new and old, the choosing of between and writing a new song. Like there were so many, I was trying to write down some lines quickly as you were reading because so many I wanted to hang on to. Beautiful. So your poem goes more outward and mine is a little bit more inward. And I think that it's kind of nice to have the two juxtapositions of the broader political and more people community and then the personal experience.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So this one is more about being a mixed blood woman growing up. I grew up around the country, so we born in Portage, lived in Fort William, which is now called Thunder Bay, then Goose Bay, and at 13 I moved to Winnipeg. And from there, I lived there till I was 30 before moving out, starting to move out west. So while at the bank in Winnipeg, I could not help but notice the lack of visibility in jobs, visible jobs of Indigenous people. There was not many, and I was born in 1955. So when I was working in the bank at Portage and Maine, I was often asked what I was, and I did feel as a mixed blood woman that a lot of liberties were taken with me and my body. So, and I did question whether they were related to the fact that I was mixed blood. And of course, I find out much later about the murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. And that helped make sense of some of what had happened to me. This is called What Are You Anyway? It begins with a quote from Roxane Gay. When we keep these men's secrets, we allow their predatory behavior to thrive. And secrets are something that is thrust upon us as women quite often, and certainly started in my childhood, being expected to keep the secrets of the men in my life.
Yeah.
His "What are you anyway" fingers creep up my sheer blouse. Hands seeking flesh, loosen grip of camisole meant to screen out prying eyes. And soon his roughness a stain on my blouse. His skin on my skin, considered polite discourse, a way to get to know one another, while I cringe inside, smile outside. No one told me to expect this, yet they must have known, his hungry eyes that wander to girls in blouses, pencil skirts intended to make us professional, our appearance a balancing act of between, not too sexy, cautioned against the matronly look of the midi and away from the mini. Our availability measured in skirt lengths, monitored by fathers who may also be bank managers conversing with other young versions of his wife, or seeking solace in exotic others as his what are you anyway fingers creep up her sheer blouse. How is it that the territory of our flesh remains his mountain to climb, and we, lost in the desert, are left to pick the bones of those who went before us? This is in the Indian Country anthology that you were a part of.
Yeah.
I treasure this book. It's filled with beautiful writing.
Yeah, that was a co-publication between CV2 and Prairie Fire.
Yes, and it's a beautiful publication. Yeah. I love the cover, everything about it.
Katharina Vermette and Warren Caillou said, yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, it was wonderful to be a part of it. I often think of that, and this has been said a million times, but the relationship between the way we care for women and women's bodies and the way we care for land. I think there's a correlation between the two, and I'm sure many people have said this before, but I think it needs to be said again and again. I wonder if we don't care for our women, will we ever care for the land, and vice versa. I think the two are very connected. And I also, in the book, it's also about older women for me. Why did older women not warn me? Why was I not told that this was the world I was entering? And why was it never acknowledged while I was in it? And in fact, I was blamed.
Right, absolutely.
For anything that happened to me.
Well, I think about that. I know that on the one hand, you know, my auntie Shirley took me aside and talked to me about, you know, men interfering with me. But of course, I had no idea what she meant. And her only practical advice was that I shouldn't smoke when I'm walking down the street. I should go into a cafe and buy a cup of tea and have my cigarette there. So that is obviously very dated information. And it was also impossible for me because, you know, she didn't take into account that I had no money. So where am I going to get money for a cup of tea? Anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I received some interesting advice as well. Not wearing too much blush.
Or you don't want to appear overheated. Right?
my mom would say, you'll look like one of those kind of women. And I didn't know what that meant.
Right. Okay, I was going to launch off into stories about, you know, the oppression of women in my time in Manitoba, but I think that it would be cool just to carry on rather than go down a rabbit hole. I mean, on the one hand, it's worth acknowledging.
Yes.
You know, like you said, it's like women would be blamed, girls and women blamed for attacks upon you. And if someone was assaulted, then often we would be told we're not allowed to hang out with that person anymore. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there is a really active suppression of women rather than encouraging the kind of healthier solidarity that would help us all understand what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, and we see that today, that's happening, and that the women, younger women in particular, are really surrounding one another and supporting one another when they tell their stories. I'm so happy to see that.
I have a question for you, topical. Yeah. So when the whole Me Too movement came along, did you post?
I did post, and actually it's interesting that you asked that question because I was writing my book, An Honest Woman, just before the Me Too movement came, and it is actually a Me Too book. So I had decided to tell more of my story, and really I've only told a smidgen. There's many things that happened to me that I will not write about,
right.
and probably not talk about publicly either. But I wanted to convey to young women, the purpose of it was for my niece and for other young women to understand that I see what's happening. I saw and experienced many of the things that they're seeing and experiencing, and that it's not okay. And so I used some of my own stories. So I was amazed, and I felt this pressure to get it out there. And it came out, I really feel, sort of half-baked, no offense to anyone, but I think the book probably needed another year. But I felt this pressure to get it out, and surprise, surprise, Me Too's there. That made it harder, actually, to promote and publish the book. That made it harder for me for some reason. that unfolding of everybody sharing, somehow that was very emotional.
Oh, for sure. I didn't once share a Me Too story, so I just kind of placed myself as, a witness to the movement. So much of my writing, particularly my earlier writing, was very focused on, assault upon myself and, near fatal moments. So on the one hand, I guess, I don't know, we've talked about trust quite a bit, right? I know that trust has interfered with my interpersonal relationships, particularly partners, and it has definitely interfered with my relationships with elders, particularly elders, because as a young person, yes, I had some abuse from siblings, but the terror was the adults, right? And so very hard to, suddenly shift gears and start accepting direction and comfort and wise advice from elders, because those are the people that most terrified me, right?
Yeah.
Likewise, I had a much more kind of historically, it was easier for me to trust men than women. And, I can go into all that, but not today. But so that was very interesting. So, after my parents split up, my mom, well, before they split up, she became feminist, a convert, shall we say. So I am second generation feminist. So I have a lot of knowledge and exposure to kind of feminist revolutionary ideas of one type or another. I don't know where I want to end up with that, but only to acknowledge that by the time Me Too came out, became a thing, I was not willing to share.
Yeah.
It's like I've written about all this. If you want to know about it, go read my fucking books.
And that brings me to something that we did talk about a little bit earlier is as a writer, as we write, does what we want to focus on change? Because I know that for me, mine's been largely, I started out thinking memoir, ended up writing poetry, which was never my intention, but I fell in love with it. Mm-hmm. And I like a narrative poem, and it was very useful for a poor memory that the trauma has left me with. So I felt I could use fragments of my story, and that it also didn't even need to be 100% factual, that it was more pointing at the feeling,
right.
That, the details of what took place.
Right.
So that was very helpful. So as a writer for yourself, how do you feel you've evolved and changed as you've been writing?
Well, I guess certainly one thing that has been consistent is that using writing to process my world, right? Whether that, and primarily that has been poetry and short nonfiction essays. How has it changed and evolved? Well, in the early days, I was writing a lot about abuse. And I had an interesting conversation with Kadri Akawenzi-Dam, where she was at the time looking for writing about sexuality, but she didn't want, it's like my response was, oh, I've got lots of, sex poems, but they were all about abuse, right? And so she, she said, well, that wasn't really what she was looking for. She wanted something happy. And I realized, I've been kind of putting a lot more attention on my unhappy experiences rather than my happy experiences. And Lee Miracle also writes about this. She talks about, what is your writing point to, right? So if I want to encourage people to celebrate our lives and settle into our bodies and enjoy our lives, then probably writing all the time hardcore about abuse is not the way to go. And, one of the consequences has been that I've written in the last, I don't know how many years, 2 books of love poetry, one for my late husband, Nic, and one for a boyfriend that I had for quite a few years. And also a book of mother poetry, which is love poetry of another kind, that was kind of tracing my experience from my first pregnancy to my last birth, and with my eldest son becoming 18. That's mother time. And then now, most recently, I've been thinking about, so I wrote a lot about birth. I had all my kids with midwives at home, the hospital complex, medical industrial complex, shall we say. I avoided all that, and I did write about that, and I should probably write more about that. So then in more recent years, I've been focusing on friendship and death. So I think about, Wanda John Cahawan and her essay, Indians Never Died Peacefully, right? So in that essay, she shares this experience of a cascade of deaths that happened in her life when she was very young. So I have thought about that a lot over the recent years, because I, in my turn, have been experiencing a cascade of death of friends and loved ones of various kinds. So that's what I've been reaching to make peace with. Some were violent deaths, some were, most I think were disease of one kind or another. But just have felt confronted by death and trying to make peace with that.
Death is a theme in my books as well, because I had early indoctrination like Wanda. I had two brothers pass away in their teens, and then my mother died when I was around 31, I believe. I'm not good with dates and times, so don't quote me on that. But it was but the formative years where normally you're entering your 20s and you're looking at life and sort of what do you want to do and who do you want to be? And I was too broken to really think about those things.
Right.
So, that's one reason I'm a late bloomer. And I just feel in some ways grateful because those things sent me into the need for healing. So at about 31, I got sober, and I've been sober most of the time since that point. Not always, I had a relapse. But I find too that part of my reason for sharing my own story is that's what we learn in recovery, is that we learn to share our experience, strength, and hope with each other. And so that's what I'm hoping to do by sharing my own story. It's not that I want some attention on me, and it's not even that I want people thinking and talking about some of those things. It gets quite uncomfortable sometimes, especially when you think about your brother coming to your reading and things like that. So I had to change what I was going to read when my brother was coming. I didn't want to, I couldn't read it in front of him, let's just say that. So, as a woman, I feel that it's important that we share our stories. I feel that they're needed, and I love doing it through the poetry. I find poetry to be a great vehicle. I fell in love with it. To me, it's decolonized writing, and I don't know if anyone else would agree with me. I just think of it that way because there's no rules, and so I can write poetry in any way I like. I can put the words on the page in any way I like. Of course, we want it to sound good and look good, but it's just this ultimate freedom. I find grammar constricting. I can speak in my own lingo and have it be good. The prairie indigenous lingo, I love it. And when I read it, I recognize it, right? So yeah, it's freedom.
Right. Well, I really, I love poetry. I kind of think that, people who practice other forms are also finding freedom in those forms. But, definitely for you and for me, poetry is a vehicle that we can go quite a way with.
And there is, of course, very colonized poetry.
Absolutely. Duncan Campbell Scott, what a heirloom.
I actually don't read that kind of poetry and never really have.
I love E. Pauline Johnson, right? And I'm very, very reactive, I guess, to the ways that she has not been incorporated into the poetic memory. I mean, you read some of her poems, like The Cattle Thief, and some of her love poems. It's very contemporary, and it's like, I'm sorry that the people back then could not appreciate it, but
yeah.
So I am definitely with those who have been working to reintegrate her perspective, which represents so many million of us.
You've been doing a lot of work to bring forth some of the writers that you knew and grew up with as a writer.
Well, more my friends.
Yeah.
Vera Manuel, she and I were working on her first book of poetry. She was better known for her playwriting. So we were working on that book when she passed away. And it took quite a while, but eventually I hooked up with her sister Emmeline and with Tiana Reeder and with Michelle Kupal. And we collaboratively created a collection of Vera Manuel's collected writings. It's not everything she wrote, but it's a very strong sample of her playwriting, poetry, short stories, and one essay. So that's the main thing. The other that I have I'm sitting with, but still haven't progressed with, certainly nowhere near to publication, is the writings of Connie Fife. She had a vision for her final book, and that is There she is, looking at me saying, when are you going to get it done? So, anyways.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I feel like, it's just scratching the surface. I'd love to talk longer, but this is a short podcast. I'd like to talk more about land and body and how they relate, and water and poetry. I happen to have a grand trine in water in astrology, so I'm a very watery person, which is great for poetry, hard to live with. My life challenge is learning to live with my own emotional nature.
Right.
Which is very emotional, very sensitive, very empathic.
Right.
So wonderful for poetry, but really hard in life, when life is as rough as it is. Like, I long for softness. So poetry and water and words, like, that's my area. I can float in that area. I can allow to come out of me what needs to come out of me. And it is related to land and body, because for me, I come from people who were very body oriented. My father was a hockey player. He could have played probably professional hockey with Montreal Canadiens. He was asked to be on their farm team. He was offered a contract, and then he was offered a tryout. He was a sports person, the dart champion, the bowling champion. My son works with wood and metal. And my uncle was a horse whisperer. We're body people. So having not, and that goes with the land, because we're out on the land a lot of times and engaging with the land. So land for me is just incredibly important. When I'm in my homeland in Treaty 1, I just feel my whole body relax. When I went to Iceland, I had this experience of, I can't even begin to describe it. I'm still trying to work out a way to write about it. And the water in Iceland is like nothing I've ever seen in my life. I could weep thinking about the purity of that water and the purity of those lands and how wonderful that is. So for me, I really found this topic, land, body, water, poetry. I could go on for days talking with you about it. And thank you, Joanne. I can hardly wait to hear your final thoughts on this. I know that you have lots to share with us.
Where to conclude? Well, I've actually lived in the unceded Salish territories for more of my life than I lived in Manitoba, in the Treaty 1 territory. And I feel much safer here. For most of my life, when I sat down to write, I would re-enter my body memory of Manitoba and write from there. And at a certain point, I kind of went, okay, so you've lived more than 3 times as long on the coast as you did on the prairie or in Ontario. So, how about we let some of that current reality permeate? So I'm just so grateful to Russell Wallace, to Lee Maracle, to Will George, and all of the other beautiful coast artists who have been friends, mentors, people who inspire me. Right? I did think that we should probably acknowledge some of our other commonalities that we didn't touch on early on. So we are both members of the Aboriginal Writers Collective West Coast, and we are both currently employed, contract workers, but employed nonetheless, with the Writers Studio at Simon Fraser University, which I think is probably for both of us our favorite job.
Most definitely.
Yes, a place of learning. I know that you've been connected with them since, for more than a decade in various roles. And for myself, I think this is my second or third year. I'm just beginning, but I love being the poetry mentor. And it was quite a shock to shift in pandemic times from doing what you know how to do and you love to do in person to suddenly sharing that experience online. So that was, a growth spurt for all of us.
Yes, quite the learning curve, and we're still all in it.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you and look forward to more conversations down the road.
Yes, thank you, and I hold my hands up to you, Joanne.
Thank you, my dear.